Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to another episode of Corpse Club Horror BFFs. I am one of your horror BFFs, Patrick Bromley, joined, as always, by my horror BFF, the managing editor of DailyDead.com, Heather Wixson. Hey, Heather.
Hello, Patrick.
This month on Horror BFFs, we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of Joe Dante's The Howling, which came out in March of 1981. We'll have just missed it by a couple of days, the actual anniversary, but it's never too late to celebrate a great werewolf movie.
It really isn't. It was interesting because I was thinking about this movie, and I know there's always like the great debate of The Howling versus American Werewolf because we had dueling werewolf movies that year. But I love both for very different reasons. And I know you are, of course, as am I, a very big Joe Dante fan. So I was really excited. I was like, before we jump into Indie Horror Month next month, I'm like, we cannot let this month go by without celebrating The Howling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of amazing. Yeah, I don't know that I would choose one over another. But I think it's kind of amazing that we got what I would argue is two of the best werewolf movies ever made. And werewolf movies are, I will say, somewhat of a deficient horror subgenre. There aren't enough of them. There should always be more werewolf movies. But
we're getting more, though. We're getting more these days, so that's good.
We are?
Yes, well, we have Wolf of Snow Hollow.
Oh, right.
There's a movie coming out in April called Bloodthirsty,
which
is also werewolf-centric. And also Josh Rubin, I believe May or June is when his Werewolves Within comes out, which has Harvey Guillen from What We Do in the Shadows.
I'll take it.
Yes.
I'll take all the werewolf movies I can get. Is it
the lycanthropes? Because werewolf-essence doesn't really work. I know that's like how we make everything cool online is adding the essence.
Essence, yeah. Lycanthropes sounds like it's from Underworld.
It does. Well, maybe everything should be sounding like it's from Underworld.
Let's not go down that road right now. I watched all those movies and we never did a podcast on them.
Whose fault is that? You want to do an Underworld podcast next month? Let's do it.
No, because I have to rewatch them because it's been so long.
I thought you only made it like through the first two.
No.
That's what you told me at a certain point.
I must have finished after that because I did watch all of them. Resident Evil, I think I only made it through the first two.
Yeah, so you have to tell me these things.
Yeah, all right, I will.
All right.
At some point, when I don't have 100 other movies to watch, I will rewatch all of the Underworld movies, and then we'll do our podcast.
All right, so everybody tune in 2026.
That's
when
right.
We finally get to dive into
part of the lycanthropes.
At that point, we'll be at the tail end of it. So.
But we got two of the best werewolf movies ever made, released within mere months of one another.
It's pretty amazing. It's funny because I always talk about this, just in terms of sort of me growing up. But my very first film memory of sitting in a movie is actually American Werewolf in London. So that to me has always sort of had like that nostalgic factor for me because I can still remember little snippets of that.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember what the theater seats looked like. I can remember freaking out because they were in a movie theater, but I was in a movie theater, and that was really weird because there was dead people talking. And then I remember my aunt taking me out because she told my mom I looked scared, but even though she was the one who was scared because she didn't really do horror movies.
Right.
But The Howling is something I rented like a few years later. And I just remember like the artwork scared the crap out of me as a kid.
It's a scary poster.
It really is. And
yeah.
what's great about that poster too, it's so simple. It doesn't necessarily exactly scream werewolf specifically, but once you see it, then you can see where the little werewolf like ism is to it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because I remember, like, I think Joe, I don't remember if this was at like a screening or if it was on like one of the special features, but I think they were having a really tough time trying to figure out how to market the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was sort of in the heyday of when slashers were becoming super popular. And even though it says Howling, like the artwork itself kind of looks like a woman in fright trying to claw her way out of something, even though now we know it's skin. And she doesn't, maybe she's not even in terror. Maybe it's just she's turning into a werewolf and she's metaphorically bursting out of her skin. But I think I remember, I don't remember how it came up, but I remember hearing or reading how Dante said it, like the marketing kind of threw a lot of people off for the movie. And that sort of wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be. But I still remember the first time renting it, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I was probably like around 7-ish, because I was very young.
That is too young to see The Howling.
Yeah, because I was even before like my embarking on watching everything from Terry Niles days. But I just remember thinking like, ooh, we tried to rent everything, and this movie is definitely not for children. But I kind of love that it's probably the sexiest vampire movie out there.
Werewolf.
If you want to call what did I call it?
A vampire movie.
Did I? Holy
Howling
shit.
2 would like a word.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I kind of like I love Howling 2. And I will go to bat over Howling 2, but I also know that Sybil Danning was really upset about Howling 2 and that ending.
Yeah,
that makes me feel a little icky now.
Yeah, no, it's gross. It's gross when you're watching it. Even if you don't know that she was upset about it, it's gross when you're watching it.
If she was in on it, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, then that's something different. That's empower. You know what I mean? Like, that's just her having fun with it. But that was even something like, I remember when I spoke to Philippe Mora, he said it was like something he really regretted was the use of that scene. He's like, I would definitely have done that differently now.
Yeah.
But retrospective, hindsight is always 20/20. There's definitely some sexy. I guess Howling 1 and 2 is definitely your 1-2 punch for sexy werewolf movies.
Yeah, I'll take it. Between Sybil Danning and Elizabeth Brooks, there's a lot of sexy werewolf there.
I still and I'm not going to get into everything, but I really, that sex scene in The Howling, I still love it. I don't care how goofy it looks now. I still love it because, first of all, it's an impossible thing to pull off regardless.
Right.
And somehow, like, as a kid, it totally worked for me. As an adult, I obviously see the problems with it. I do not care.
Yeah.
It still works. I love it. And I love the tiny little werewolves at the end howling on the little cliff, like, ooh. Like, I love it all.
Well, you have to appreciate a screenwriter and a director asking themselves, what would it look like to see two werewolves do it? Let's put it on screen.
And now we know.
Yeah, exactly.
And now we know. Yeah. And I think when I was a kid also, too, because I was always really fascinated, I guess I kind of always knew, like, somehow some aspect of journalism was going to be part of my life, because I always really loved the character of Karen White. And I've seen some people, I read a piece a couple of years ago where somebody said how, like, they thought her performances was, like, a little too much because, like, she was always hysterical. And they said, like, something about her being uneven. And first of all, like, that was me ready to just fight. But I think I love Dee Wallace in this movie. And she's reacting very emotionally because she's been through a severely traumatic ordeal that she was not prepared to have to deal with. And then on top of that, like, now she's being attacked by werewolves everywhere when she gets to the climax of the movie. And, like, are you going to be level-headed and calm when that's happening? Hell
right.
No, I'd be screaming my ass off, too. There's a lot of people sort of misinterpret female paranoia and female trauma in some of these 80s movies. It kind of makes me bummed out a little bit.
Yeah. I've noticed an overall trend, I feel like, in the last 5 years or so. There's this revisionism that The Howling isn't as good as we think it is.
Oh, no.
I hear people talk about werewolf movies. It's getting left off the list of the best werewolf movies. I know it's being overshadowed by American Werewolf. In some ways, I I attribute that to the transformation scene. There's so much that's great about American Werewolf. I am not trying to downplay the greatness of American Werewolf in London, but I do feel like people reduce them to their transformation scenes. And yes, the sequence in An American Werewolf in London is superior to the transformation in The Howling, you know. But that doesn't automatically make one a better movie, and it doesn't mean that we should take The Howling out of the conversation. I just think The Howling is kind of it's a tricky movie to wrap your head around, because it's not a comedy, but it's working with ideas that are kind of funny, and it's kind of making fun of a self-help movement that was very in vogue in the late 70s and early 80s and is really still kind of in existence today. It's just taken a different form. So it's not outwardly jokey, but it's making references to old werewolf movies and old horror movies, and there's characters named after directors from old werewolf movies, and we have John Carradine showing up as this old werewolf who wants to kill himself, and there's like something kind of funny about that, but the movie's never jokey. So it's doing this really tricky balance of tones where, as you pointed out, you know, the werewolf sex scene is on its face goofy, and yet it works. So it's like, this shouldn't work as well as it does, but here we are, and it's like a hot scene, and it's goofy, but it's funny, and it's sexy at the same time. And then we get to like the Belinda Balaski stuff, who for me is the MVP of the movie. I love her so much in this movie.
Oh, she's great.
She really is. And it's nice to see her get a big role like this. She works in so many Joe Dante movies, and she had a big role in Piranha. But this is, I think, the biggest thing she ever did in one of his movies. And she really makes the most of it. And it's so sad when she, spoilers, is killed. She's kind of the most major character to be killed off. And again, you're not expecting it in a movie that has been a little bit silly, and then all of a sudden gets really serious. You know, it starts off so like sleazy and grimy, then it gets kind of silly, then it gets downright scary when the werewolf shows up, then it gets sad when she's killed off, and it's doing all of these things at one time. And I feel like I've monologued way too much, but I think it's a hard movie for people to wrap their heads around a little bit. Because it's really sophisticated what it's doing, and the screenplay by John Sayles is really sophisticated, and Joe Dante's direction is really sophisticated, and I think it just gets reduced to like, oh well, she wouldn't stand there and watch him transform for that long, so therefore the movie's not good.
First of all, monologue away. I will let you monologue away, my friend. Second of all, I totally agree, and I think also too, what's really interesting is, you know, for much as it is about, you know, a horror movie about like, you know, this woman being terrorized and then basically in a cult of werewolves, and you have sort of the beast within, like, and sort of that conflict, and like, you know, because you have Dr. Wagner like trying to like get everybody to sort of fit into society. I think what the center for me has always been is the relationship between Karen and her husband Bill.
Yeah.
And it really is about a marriage in crisis. Even before all of this happens, you get the sense that there's already this sort of division between them. She doesn't take his name, which in the 80s was very unusual, even for a professional woman. Although if you're Holly McClane, you know, it's a little different. That was later in the 80s. But like, even
explain the line, it's a Japanese company.
You know what? They're very traditional about women being married and working in offices. And the only reason I know that is because my mom worked for a Japanese tech company in the 80s. It was called JST, and they were like I think they were in Elk Grove. And they viewed women in sort of corporate world very differently than they viewed males. Like men there were encouraged to have families and things like that. Women were not. Okay,
so she shouldn't be married if she's working for their company. Therefore, she keeps her maiden name.
Yes.
Got it.
It's weird, but it's like a thing. At least it was back then. It's probably different now because, you know, obviously society has changed a bit.
It's a line I've always just accepted but never really thought about. And then when we were watching it this most recent time, I was like, well, that doesn't explain anything.
Yeah, because I remember there was, and there was very few women that my mom actually worked with there too. There was maybe like 3 other women in the whole office. So it was that's what was surprised me at Die Hard, is that it was very evenly 50-50 women and men.
Yeah.
But I would imagine most of the women in that office were probably like administrative roles and things like that. So Holly being of a higher echelon was something really remarkable. So I gotta throw out their echelon.
Mm-hmm.
I've been saving that for a rainy day. But back to Howling, for me, like you get, even before we get to the part where Karen meets with Eddie, like they're talking at the station, and Bill's there with Chris, and they're talking about the footage, and Chris is like, oh, well, Karen's seen the footage, and Bill's like, she has. So you even get a sense that she's already got this sort of independence to her, where there's a lot about what she does and who she is that her husband isn't aware of. Mm-hmm. So there's already sort of like this division between them. And, once she's attacked by Eddie in the porno store, the division gets bigger pretty much immediately, because now she's working through trauma. He doesn't understand how to help her get through it. And, and from there, it just keeps unraveling. They go up to the colony, and initially you think that, this is some place where she's going to find peace, where she's going to be able to work through it. But ultimately, it just makes her marriage worse. And I think it's really interesting because, and this is something I've been working on, one of the theme for my paper that I'm doing in humanities right now is talking about like how a lot of horror movies in the 1980s were really about the dissolution of the traditional American family unit, mm-hmm. and sort of the rise of divorce that was happening throughout the 80s. And it was sort of in the wake of Ronald Reagan's, mantra of like putting the American family first and traditional values and family values. So to me, The Howling is like another one of those examples. Sorry, there's drag racing and whatever. But to me, The Howling was just yet another example of a woman who is very career oriented, and she's really good at it. And basically, ultimately it's a struggle between her professional career, professional life, and her home life. And which one of those is going to survive this? And ultimately, she ends up having to sacrifice both in the end, because, she ends up having to be shot on TV because it's the only way to get people to understand what really happened. But I think it's a woman who ultimately still, in the wake of everything that's happened, she puts her profession ahead of everything else, mm-hmm. for the sake of everybody, for everybody else's well-being, which I think is pretty phenomenal. So there you go. There's my monologue.
No, it's absolutely true. There's a lot of scenes of Karen, of Karen and Bill, where you
There's
can
no
tell
eye contact between them.
Yeah, like I'm thinking of the scene where she wakes up and because she heard something, and he's immediately dismissive of her. Yeah, it almost seems like his sort of wandering, or his eventual tryst with Marcia is sort of Marcia Quist. His tryst with Quist. We were both trying to get there at the same time.
Mentally, we were totally there.
It was almost seems like a foregone conclusion, because he does seem not checked out of the marriage, but not threatened by his wife, or emasculated he feels by his wife. I don't know. I'm just working this out right now as we're talking about it, but it's obvious that there's a problem there. I don't want to say that there's no love there, because I wouldn't describe their marriage as being loveless, but I do think there's a power dynamic between them that he feels very threatened by.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because even when they get to the colony, everybody's fussing over Karen, and he's kind of like this weird sort of afterthought where he's right. Like, oh, I'm in hardware. And like that's supposed to be like the joke. That's like his dad joke. That's the thing. He uses that in everyday conversation that he has. But nobody up there is like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, oh, I run some health clubs and I, got barbells and stuff. Like there's such until the point where he's sort of welcomed into the male circle of the colony and encouraged to go hunting. Like, he doesn't really have an identity in this movie, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And again, like, it's, when you look back and see, like, the only person, like, that talks to him specifically during that entry scene when they get to the colony and they're having the big cookout and everything is Marcia Quist, because she's a predator. Like, I mean, there's nothing about that woman that does not scream predatory. Like, and I love it. I actually decided that werewolf high priestess is the look that I'm going to be going for post-pandemic.
Well,
I've just decided to embrace it.
She's very much the template for the Sybil Danning character in part 2. And
as much as I love Sybil in part 2, and I love Stirrup, like, we really should have. It should have, I mean, especially the way that they set up the ending of the Howling.
Right.
Howling 2 should have been about Marcia.
Yeah, probably.
Because I mean, I would have been interested to see them like, okay, well, things didn't work out at the colony. We know some of the werewolves that survived. Where do they go?
Right.
Like, what happens to them?
Right.
Other than she gets to go to a bar and order a rare burger. So for me, like the fact, I mean, as much as I love Howling 2, I will say the first time I ever watched it, my biggest disappointment with it is that beyond the fact that they sort of do this really silly tie-in to the first one through Karen White, God bless that movie. I love it, but it's so goofy. Like, they just totally dismiss all of those werewolf characters that were actually really interesting to me. Because, like, for me, you have a whole family of werewolves with the Quists. Because you've got Marcia, you've got Eddie, and I totally am blanking on the younger guys. TC.
Yeah.
That's the little guy who's running around with the vest all the time.
Right.
He's like, and he gets his arm chopped off. So, like, give me more of the Quist family. I would have loved that. And they just kind of let that sort of fall. And I think for me, like, Elizabeth Brooks, like, she's as good as any of the women in that movie. I think Belinda is the MVP. Like, there is just something about her presence where she doesn't have to say anything.
Yeah. And
you already know the mood of that moment without her even, like, opening her mouth.
Definitely. Definitely. I love how much Joe Dante loves his actors and how he fills every role with people that he's seen in other movies that he loved, or that, Elizabeth Brooks doesn't necessarily fit that bill. Obviously, she's very well cast, but just all the smaller roles being filled with people like Robert Picardo being part of his kind of stable of actors. Slim Pickens showing up, Kevin McCarthy showing up. Who's the other one? I'm forgetting. Well, John Carradine, I already mentioned.
Yeah.
But, like, every time you watch a Joe Dante movie, it's so fun to just spot all the character actors that he includes, because he just is such a fan of those types of actors, much more so than big Hollywood stars. He'd much rather make a movie with all character actors. And that kind of starts in The Howling. I mean, he had worked with some of these people before. Kevin McCarthy, obviously, and Belinda Velasquez both showed up in Piranha. But this is kind of the first time we get a real Joe Dante cast.
Well, what's interesting to me? Everybody complains about that. Like, whenever Rob Zombie does it, everybody gets mad that he uses, like, a lot of the same actors, like, all the time, right?
I love it.
But Carpenter did it a lot.
Yeah.
Joe Dante did it even more, and we were okay with that then. So how did that temperature change? Is it just because it's Rob Zombie? I mean, I know the answer to that. But, you know what I mean? Like, why is it such a thing that we look down on now?
Right.
Versus something that I think makes movies cool is when you have, like, these character actors who make appearances in the same director's movies over and over again, and they show you something different every time. I mean, I know it's a little different with Zombie because they have, like, similar characters in some of those movies, but, like, I don't know, like let's keep the idea of like sort of the acting troupe alive.
Yeah, definitely.
Like I want more of that. You know, I'm okay. Like, you know, if James Wan wants to work with Vera Farmiga forever, like in Patrick Wilson, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, I say I welcome that. I just think that there's something really intrinsically fun about that. And I also think too, because when you're a performer like that, you have to build up a rapport. You have to build up trust with your director. So like the fact is, like, clearly, you know, the more you work with somebody, the better you're going to be for them, because you don't have to do all that initial getting to know you stuff and trying to figure out the dynamics and how you work together. Like, you know, if you're 5 movies in with Dante, it's a shorthand.
Right.
And that to me only makes things better.
Right.
So
I didn't see The Howling until probably high school. Maybe I rented it. I know I bought the Laserdisc then when the Laserdisc came out. There was a great special edition Laserdisc that I owned. And there were like jokes in there I didn't get, like the fact that, you know, Dick Miller's name is Walter Paisley. I had never seen A Bucket of Blood at the time that I saw The Howling.
I didn't get that joke until I was older either.
Yeah, I mean, little jokes like that. I probably didn't even get that Patrick McNee's name was George Wagner. You know, I just took it at face value. And then it wasn't until probably listening to the audio commentary, which is a really fun audio commentary, by the way, if you've never listened to it. I think it's the same one that's on the Scream Factory Blu-ray. That Joe Dante starts pointing out, you know, okay, I took these names from the names of famous werewolf movie directors. And I like, you know, somebody once said something about The Simpsons, which was the more you know, the smarter you are, the funnier The Simpsons is. Because you get more references and you understand more what's being made fun of. I think that's true of Joe Dante movies also. I think the more you know, the better you can appreciate Joe Dante movies. And so The Howling only gets better for me as I get older and can appreciate new aspects of the movie, whether it is the little inside jokes, whether it is just the obvious, blatant obviousness of like cutting from Karen's death to like the dog food commercial. And just that Joe Dante's like, no, I'm going for the most base joke here. I don't care. I'm not above it. I like that he's not above anything.
I also like that. I feel like he sort of popularized like cutting to like cartoons of things that mimicked movies around that time.
Yeah.
Because like, you know, I mean, there's no secret that obviously there was, by the inclusion of Mickey Mouse and American Werewolf, you know, Landis was sort of poking fun of like, well, we're going to stick this icon of American, you know, kids, you know, entertainment throughout this movie, which is like, you know, a very violent, you know, rated R horror movie. But I think Dante, like, by just literally throwing in these cartoons that we all grow up with and making them so directly connected to what we're watching,
right,
is genius. And I kind of wish we did more of that these days. I'm good with that. Like, I like that kind of stuff. I don't know, like, I just, for as serious and as scary as The Howling is, you know, it is those sort of very, and I say darkly meaning like really darkly, like funny moments that just, like, you really realize, like, oh, this movie isn't just here to scare you. It really is here to sort of pull apart sort of this facade of what we know about, like I don't want to say mass media, because that sounds like weird and sort of generic, but like how we watch movies and how we consume these entertainment. And again, I just think it's really smart in a lot of ways that people don't often give it credit for it.
Well, it's fascinating to me, too, that Landis and Joe Dante are working completely separately in 1981, you know, making their respective werewolf movies, and yet they both come out with these werewolf movies that are like part comedy, part horror, both very self-aware. Landis is using music to comment on the werewolf genre and using all the songs that mention the moon. And Joe Dante is using TV and movies as a way of commenting on the werewolf genre. And, you know, that they're both sort of these meta-textual, self-referential werewolf movies that exist independently of each other and come out at the exact same time. And again, to me, are two of, if not the two best werewolf movies ever made. I would put maybe the original Wolfman up there with them, and for me, that's the top three.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think also too, because you mentioned the transformations, which, you know, there's no touching American Werewolf. I mean, it set the bar. Nobody's even come close to that bar. In other ways, other movies have raised the bar as well, of course, you know, and that brings me to Rob Bottin, who, you know, famously did The Thing after The Howling, and was sort of this wonderkin of special effects at this time. And, you know, there's, of course, the sort of famous story how Rick Baker had to leave The Howling to go do American Werewolf, and that's when Rob Bottin came in. But what's interesting to me is that I think as much as I love American Werewolf in London's transformation, and I've studied it gratuitously over the decades for various reasons, but I think to me what I think in terms of the impact of getting sort of a visceral response from a transformation, American Werewolves to me is all about wonder. It's all about like, holy shit. To me, my reaction to Howling is, oh my God, because it's so terrifying and it's so raw, and it isn't the American Werewolf transformation at all, because that's almost symmetrical in how it happens, where it's like one hand, two hand, you know, back, you know, right foot, left foot, the spine comes up, then the face starts to elongate, and then it's just like, it all sort of happens really cleanly, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't seem very natural in its execution in terms of a creature transformation. Where, like, if something's kind of transforming, like if you're transforming into the Blob or whatever, like, it just would be happening, right? And I think, to me, that's what I really love about Bottin's transformation in The Howling, is because the first time you watch that, if you're not prepared for it, like, it is horrifying. There's nothing, like, there's nothing pretty about it. It's not symmetrical at all. It's like his head starts bubbling, but then his hand starts going, and then his mouth's already starting to elongate, and then it's like his ears are kind of coming up like here and there, but not all at the same time. It's so different, and I think for me it's also really close up, and it's really in your face the way that they shoot it. Mm-hmm. And to me, like, it's probably I don't want to say more effective, because that's not the word I'm looking for, but it is the more, it's the transformation, I think, for me, that is the one that's more likely to haunt your nightmares than American Werewolf. American Werewolf to me is like, holy shit, that's cool. And I also think that also boils down to whether or not you prefer your werewolves to be more on all fours and dog-like, or if you prefer your werewolf standing up.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, I mean, for a couple of months, you know, The Howling was able to boast the best transformation effects ever put on screen. And
then the god Rick Baker comes in and right. Like, guess what?
But for a few months, they had their time in the sun. It was like, can you believe? Because people would go to see The Howling, and they had never seen anything like that before, you know? It was incredible. And then just a few months later, it's like, oh, and now this other thing comes along? Are you kidding me? It's like if somebody had topped Terminator 2 a few months after Terminator 2 came out, because I remember those being effects that were like nothing I'd ever seen in a movie before. Those were the first effects I can remember that just blew my mind. And then if, you know, 6 months later somebody came along and was like, oh yeah, watch this, and did something even cooler, I don't even know how I would have taken it. But I have a hard time watching the transformation in American Werewolf in London. I always have my whole life. I've gotten better at it, but because it always seems like it hurts so much. And
Yeah.
I struggle with that a lot. Like, that means it's working on me. You know, that's not a fault of the movie. I'm saying the movie is too effective for me and makes me very uncomfortable, to the point where sometimes if I'm watching it, I will literally fast forward that sequence. I remember having to leave the room when I was a kid watching Terror in the Aisles, because they show the transformation in Terror in the Aisles, and I hated it so much. It upset me so much that I would have to leave the room and then come back when it was over. But I prefer the actual werewolves of the Howling, because I'm a fan of the bipedal werewolf who stands up on two legs like a person, as opposed to on all fours like a dog. And I love the Howling's werewolves. I mean, they're enormous, which is very cool. And they just have those giant ears and those giant claws. I'm less a fan of the Karen White werewolf at the end.
She looks like my Winnie when she transforms. She's so adorable.
Definitely a
She
puppy,
like,
like with the little tear. Why they chose to go with that, I don't totally understand.
Maybe she sort of half morphs.
She turns into a Pekingese. I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know, but like it's funny. We were joking because like she literally looks like Winnie, my dog, at the end. And so we always say like she looks like the end of the Howling, because she's also like a bloodthirsty beast herself. But yeah, it's definitely like, oh, she looks a little bit like an Ewok. But I think also too, I mean, you know, I would have liked to see her go further, but also like you can't have a 5-minute transformation, I guess, in that sequence.
No,
like
yeah,
kind
it's
of to
not.
Get it done.
Yeah, it's not the length of the transformation that I don't get. It's what they land on.
But here's the thing, like maybe because she was a newer werewolf, because we get the sense that this was only days after, because the fires are still burning at the colony.
Right.
So maybe she is like a pup werewolf, where she's not a fully formed werewolf. I don't really know. Like maybe there was something that like sort of explained that, like, you know, when you're like a new werewolf, like maybe you kind of look like a puppy in a way. And as you spend more time as a werewolf, like maybe you grow into this more bigger monstrosity. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. But it is adorable and not scary at all. And very
how
sad.
could Dennis Dugan shoot it?
Huh?
How could Dennis Dugan shoot it?
It's like
I know that was
Yeller.
the plan. They had to expose it and then shoot her. But yeah, I would have been like, oh, I can't hurt you. I'm going to take you home.
I know. We could be belly scritchies. I would give Dee Wallace belly scritchies. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Yeah, but I also think it's interesting too that, like, you know, at the point where we meet up with her, where she's at the end, where she's at the news station and she's getting ready to go and expose all this. You know what? There's no mention of the fact that she just had to kill her husband.
Yeah.
Like that's it, to me again. That also sort of reinforces this idea of how their marriage was just so done before this all started. Because like, if I had to shoot Brian, I'm not even married to Brian. If I had to shoot Brian, I think I'd be a little stressed out about it a few days later.
Well, she knew where those scratches came from. I
know, but still, you know. But yeah, it's interesting to me that like it's, again, I don't think enough, you know, everybody talks about Dee Wallace and E.T., which I love. She was like everybody's mom in the 80s. But there's just something really great about Karen White. And I don't know, she just made me kind of want to like do that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But now I'm an entertainment reporter, so, you know, nothing nearly as important. So all I know is if I do get bit by a werewolf, I'll go into real journalism so then I can expose it for the world to see.
Do it on your YouTube show.
Yeah, I'll become a YouTube celebrity. I'm working on it, right? Sure. Aren't we all?
Well, yeah.
So, but yeah, I just, you know, I mean, yeah, it's definitely not the most werewolfy looking werewolf at the end. But I don't really mind.
It's not a deal breaker. I still love the movie. It's just, it was such an odd choice when they had already established these other werewolves and kind of what the werewolves looked like. And they have a very certain look to them. And to then suddenly introduce a completely new kind of werewolf and say like, oh, well, sometimes they turn into a Pekingese, I thought was a a weird choice because it is slightly distracting at the end of the movie, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that they did it that way to sort of elicit sympathy
Sure, which
from the
makes sense.
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It works.
because they want to still keep her sort of steeped in this innocence
Right.
of the fact that she kind of got caught up in all of this.
Right.
So I get it. I mean, it's definitely a choice.
Yeah, it is a choice.
So it is a choice. It's the choice of a new generation. Sorry, every time I say that, whenever anybody says that was certainly a choice, like I just go into Wayne's World mode, I'll be like, yes, and it's a choice of a new generation. Sorry. I like to keep things on topic here, as you can tell.
Beyond the Howling, and we'll get back to the Howling in just a few minutes, but like, I kind of named what my top 3 would be. After that, we get into like Silver Bullet, Ginger Snaps territory. What else is part of the conversation, you think?
I think for me, like my top 3 would be Howling, American Werewolf, and Silver Bullet.
Okay.
I love the original Wolfman. I do. But it was a movie that I didn't totally love as a kid. So I think my affection for it only kind of grew as I got older. Obviously, the Underworld movies would be up there.
Part of the lycanthropes, I get it.
I'm such a jerk. And I will say, I think, we mentioned this before, but I think The Wolf of Snow Hollow does something really interesting with the concept of werewolves, and I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah.
But I found that I feel like Jim Cummings' approach to that story was really intriguing, and every time I think about that movie, I kind of love it more. And so I really recommend that. And I also, it's not a werewolf movie, but I will say that I think what they do with werewolves and What We Do in the Shadows is super fun.
Damn it, I still haven't watched it.
The movie?
Oh, I've seen the movie. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the TV show.
Werewolves, not swerewolves.
Right, yeah. No, the movie is really fun, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think their sort of brief take on it is kind of fun. And we talked about the Wolfman remake. Was that last year?
Oh, that's right, yeah. I think that would have been last year because that would have been the 10th anniversary.
Something. Yeah, and again, that's a movie I definitely enjoy more now than I did back then when I first saw it. So that to me was pretty fun. And of course, I think the segment of werewolves in Trick or Treat was pretty badass too.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I should mention Dog Soldiers because people are probably freaking out. Like, what about Dog Soldiers? Yeah. Dog Soldiers is fun. And you know which one I like a lot that doesn't get talked about enough is Late Phases.
Late Phases? I was just going to say that. Yeah. Yes, those transformations are fantastic. And also very much in line with the Trick or Treat transformations. And they made that movie for no money.
Yeah.
And that those transformations looked great.
Just the premise alone of a werewolf in like a retirement community is so inspired.
Yeah, and Nick D'Amici, I think is
that sounds right.
The actor in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's so freaking good in that movie.
Yes, he is.
I know eventually we're going to get to Cursed on our Wes Craven podcast.
Oh, boy.
Which I haven't seen since I rented it. That was one of the few, there was like 2 or 3 Wes movies like around that time that I didn't get to see in theaters. That was one of them.
That's one of the few that I did see in theaters.
Boy.
I saw it opening weekend and I don't think I've seen it one time since then. I have seen it once.
Okay. Yeah, I rented it. I don't remember a lot about it. So I'm excited to re-explore that a little bit too. But yeah, we definitely need more werewolves. And I like the fact that we're starting to get more. But the thing is, it's like in when you're talking about like creature features and things like that, there are so many people out there want to make werewolf movies, but they're really expensive. The creature suits alone can be like astronomically expensive, and then you have to deal with transformations and things like that. Like I remember when I worked at a special effects house, and this was like in 2010, and I remember like we quoted somebody for like a hand punched werewolf suit, because like you have to get real looking hair and you have to hand punch it because the hair has to fall naturally. I think it was like $70,000.
Oh,
just for the suit, which is kind of nuts. You know what I just realized? We didn't mention Ginger Snaps, and more people are going to get mad at us.
I did say Ginger Snaps.
Oh, did you?
I
Did I
did.
miss that?
Yeah, I put that
Oh,
with like
sorry.
my next in. Like after my top
Okay.
3, my next in would be Ginger Snaps and Silver Bullet.
What about Teen Wolf?
Teen Wolf is down a little further on the list.
You know, I just rewatched Teen Wolf because
Yeah.
it's on Hulu, and I just didn't. I only had access to Hulu because I didn't have my access to like my other stuff on the PlayStation, so I was just going off my Amazon, and I kind of love that movie less the more I watch it.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Isn't that sad?
I loved it as a kid because I loved werewolves and I loved Michael J. Fox.
Michael
but
J. Fox, right?
As an adult,
what else do you do?
I have less use for it as an adult.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I will say that the Teen Wolf show was actually pretty good. I watched the first 3 seasons of it and then sort of stepped away for personal reasons I won't get into. But I really liked it, and I actually thought it was a really good I think it was better in how it depicted the horrors of adolescence and tying that into the werewolf tropes. I think it does it better than the movie did. And again, I'll probably get some hate mail for that, but I stand by it.
I never watched it, so I couldn't say.
Yeah, it was actually pretty good. I was really surprised by it because it has like, you know, it sort of had that slick, like Twilight-esque marketing to it. But don't let that fool you because that wasn't what the show was at all. So, and it gave us Dylan O'Brien.
Sure.
Yeah, he was Styles. He was also in Love and did you see Love and Monsters?
I still haven't seen Love and Monsters, but I hear very good things about it.
Oh, your family would love it.
Yeah, I hear very good things.
You know, I don't know. I think I have it. I still have to add the digital copy to my Vudu. I should give you guys my Vudu so you can watch that with the kids. I think they would love it. I really think they would totally love that.
That would be great.
So, yeah, I have like a ton of Vudu codes to catch up on, but, you know, you could show them that and then, you know, show them like The Shining or something off of there. I don't know.
All the Saw movies.
We don't have Saw digitally.
Put them on there, please. My kids need to see Spiral.
No. I've got the Resident Evils, though, if you want those.
Sure, I'll take it.
So, but yeah, I'm with you. Like, you know, I'm a kid who grew up, like, admittedly, like, my subgenre was always vampires. But I think werewolves were always a very close second. I think it was just sort of these creatures, like, that were steeped in the traditions of universal horror. And sort of this, to me, those were like, you know, we were lucky that we would eventually get like characters like Freddy and Jason and Chucky and Candyman and things like that. But I think for me, like the creatures that like always I obsessed over when I was a kid were vampires and werewolves. And I just was like, there was something really interesting to me about that. And I always like went back and forth, like, would I rather be a vampire or would I rather be a werewolf? I think I've sided on the argument in terms of wanting to be a vampire because I want to live forever. Because the idea of dying scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, being a vampire would be way better. There's no question about it. Like,
yeah,
I love werewolf movies,
cool.
but I would never want to be a werewolf. It seems terrible.
Yeah, like what happens if like you get stuff in your fur? Like, do you have to like comb yourself out before you transform back into a human? Like, I have a long-haired dog. Do you know what kind of a pain in the ass it is to keep her groomed? Like, we have to brush her every day because her face gets, like, full of schmutz. Like, I couldn't imagine being a werewolf and have to brush out your face every day.
You really should have named her Karen White.
You know, we were originally going to name her Zool because since our first movie that we saw together was Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
But now we were, like, kind of saying, like, we should have jokingly named her Gozer because there's always a thing of, like, you know, pick the most innocent form of like evil that you know what I mean?
Right.
And she's like adorable, but she will like destroy you. So, you know, she should have been Gozer. But yeah, Karen White would be up there too. So
I just like the idea of a dog with a first and last name.
Well, like Johnny Utah, yeah. Well, she's
exactly like Johnny Utah.
She's technically Winifred Sanderson. So.
Okay. I'll allow it.
So she does have a less. Yeah. So, but never name your dog after Bette Midler because you're just going to get like a super assertive A-type personality dog who thinks she runs the place.
Who kills on Broadway?
Bette Midler. I know.
Your dog kills on Broadway, I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, she would. So you wouldn't believe the show tunes she can sing. So now that we're into Bette Midler movies, I like how none of us mentioned, none of us, there's only two of us,
Yeah.
neither one of us mentioned Werewolves in Van Helsing.
Why would we? Really?
We're not gluttons for punishment. There's also another werewolf movie that's coming out, and I'm totally blanking on the name because I just saw it at Sundance, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a little drier, so it's kind of in the vein of more like the Wolfman remake. So it's a little more like old timey. I can't believe I'm totally blanking on this, and it sucks because I don't update my blog anymore because it's too much of a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out what that was called. Oh, 8 for Silver.
Okay.
And that was directed by, I'm looking it up really quick, Sean Ellis.
I remember hearing about it out of Sundance, but I didn't get a chance to see it, obviously.
Yeah, it's about like 20 minutes too long. And I think by starting the movie the way they do sort of defeats a little bit of the mystery of it. I think it actually does some really cool things that I have never seen before in a werewolf movie.
I'll take it.
And there's also scenes involving a scarecrow, which kind of scared the crap out of me. I was like, oh my God, that is horrifying. So I don't know what the plan is for that movie, but I'm guessing maybe it'll come out this year. So,
how many of the... Obviously, we talked a little bit about Howling 2, and you are a fan of Howling 2. But beyond that, how many of the sequels have you seen?
I've only seen the first 3.
Okay. Is 3 the marsupials?
3 is, I believe so.
Okay.
Hold on. Actually, that is a lie. I actually saw Howling Reborn, too, that covered it.
And how was that?
Oh, I mean, considering there's a werewolf in that movie for, like, 8% of the movie, you tell me. And it's a digital transformation, and the creature looks really terrible. 3 is the marsupials.
Oh, that's what I thought. Okay, because that's Philly Mora again, right?
Yes, it is. I've had a few people tell me that I should see. I don't think it was the Rebirth. The Freaks.
I saw The Freaks many, many years ago. I don't remember any of it except that what's his name is in it, right? Bruce Payne? Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's the only other sequel I've ever seen. I've seen 1, 2, and 6.
Interesting. So maybe like down the line we should do a Howling sequels episode.
Well, it's weird because I'm a werewolf fan and I love the Howling, and yet I've not made it a point to see any of these movies. And I guess because they just don't have a very good reputation, you know, like.
But, you know, I mean, think about how many movies that, like, we both like that people would easily dismiss. True. So, you know, maybe.
But have you ever met, like, a huge fan of, like, Howling 4?
I believe so, because you know who I think is a really big fan is Matt Serafini.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he and my tastes kind of line up a lot.
Oh, okay.
So he's also one of my Underworld buddies and not Resident Evil, but he's definitely Underworld. So I remember sending him pictures from the red carpet that I did for the last one of Kate Beckinsale. He was all excited. But yeah, I think that the sequels do have sort of their fan base. They're not as loud, I think, as most people. But like, I don't know. I think a lot of them are on Tubi. Okay. Maybe we just dig into that later in the year.
We can.
You know, we got nothing
We're always looking for
on.
show ideas. So.
Yeah. You know, I don't know. I think there might be something kind of fun about that.
And what are your thoughts on the announced Andy Muschietti remake for Netflix?
You know, I'm of two minds. I like Andy Muschietti a lot. I like Mama. I don't love Mama, but I like Mama enough. I love the first It. I don't like, and I actually just rewatched It Chapter 2 a couple weeks ago because I actually did them both back to back because I was working late one night.
I still haven't done that. I keep meaning to watch it as one big movie, and I still haven't done it.
First of all, it's kind of jarring. It is. It's like because you're sort of settling in for this nostalgic ride, and it's like the music and It's just like, and then you switch over, and then it's just a different feeling. I think I liked it chapter 2 more now than I think. I think a lot of the problems that I had with it, they're kind of slipping away from me a little bit, but I don't think it's as polished as the first one. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was working with somebody else's script.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Andy Muschietti is a funny guy. He's really smart. He knows, like, he is a horror nerd. And I really feel like if he's going to get what made the original, if there's somebody out there who's going to get what made the original Howling great, not talking Halloween here, and can find ways to sort of bring it into contemporary America, I think he's got a pretty good shot at it. I think it's when he's trying to do the more straightforward drama stuff is where I feel like he loses a little footing as a storyteller.
Okay.
So I think if he can lean in a little bit more to the undertones of comedy that were in the original Howling and do something that's more in line with that, I'm going to watch it either way, But
yeah,
I
will too.
Because, like, isn't he doing the Flash movie too?
Yes.
So, like, who knows when we're going to see the Howling movie?
If ever.
Or the Howling Project at Netflix, yeah.
Right.
But I and if he gets busy, I would love to crack at it. Can I have a crack at it?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
That's how that works. You put it out there in the universe, and the universe responds.
Call me Netflix.
The question that we always ask when they announce something like this is like, why remake The Howling? Why not just make a new werewolf movie? Like, I'm totally down for an Andy Muschietti directed werewolf movie.
Yes.
Why does it need to be a remake of The Howling?
I get it. I totally get it, and I totally agree with it. But unfortunately, the industry that we're in these days is that, we've seen the industry become sort of commodified. There's been a commodification of property, right? Where, unfortunately, you can't get people into theaters in many cases unless there's some sort of intrinsic tie-in to whether it's a graphic novel, it's an existing movie, it's a TV show. Unfortunately, that's where the sensibilities are when you come to general audiences. Like us horror nerds, we're going to watch anything that involves anything horror, right? You give us werewolves, it's an easy sell. We're there. But to get standard moviegoers to go into a horror movie that sort of doesn't have like that name, like it's a bigger sell, and I think that's what's kind of interesting when you look at James Wan's career is that he was able to turn sort of these standalone ideas into properties. He did it with Saw. He did it with Insidious. I mean, The Conjuring is a little different because it's based on real life people, but he also then turned it into this franchise that ultimately then started to spin off.
Right. And
to me, James Wan is like one of the most interesting, like, case studies you could make about modern horror, I think. Because, like, but then you look at Dead Silence, nobody showed up for that.
Right.
So it's really interesting to me, but I think, unfortunately, we are at the point when it comes to releasing movies in theaters and doing, like, big releases, like, you're not going to convince an 18-year-old kid to go see a random werewolf movie, but if they see the title The Howling, they're probably like, oh, is that like from like that old movie? Which I know it sucks that like these movies now that we grew up with are considered old movies.
It is 40 years old.
It is, I mean, it's like us watching the Universal Monster movies.
Right.
If you want to feel really old about it.
Right.
And yeah, believe me, every time I realize that, like I turn into the Matt Damon gif where I just get older out of nowhere. Like suddenly I get like 10 more gray hairs and I get like one more wrinkle on the side of my face. So like it's unfortunate, but it's like that awareness, that people have of these things existing, and it sucks because we always want new and original things. So that's why I'm grateful when we do get movies like The Wolf of Snow Hollow or Bloodthirsty that's going to be out soon, or Werewolves Within and things like that, like an 8 for Silver. Like I'm all for giving us more, but I don't see mainstream audiences. Like, the only thing, like, I think like maybe Werewolves Within is positioned a little better because they have Harvey Guillen from What We Do in the Shadows. And that show has been so wildly popular with a lot of people who maybe have never even seen the movie.
Right.
That one's got a little bit better of a shot. I mean, it just sucks, but it's the business, and I always try to like remind people of that. Like, ultimately making movies is still a business. Like, you still have to make money on it. People still need to get paid, and it sucks. Like, it sucks that we put properties ahead of innovation and creativity and originality. But because of the money that people are throwing at things these days, like, it kind of sucks that there's not risks happening. And we don't really we're not in sort of this flux of having to be like letting sort of these mid-level distributors and production companies get a shot at these big theatrical releases like they were when we were kids.
Yeah, I mean,
think about how many movies that we grew up with that if they were released today, they would maybe do a couple weeks in like a repertory theater and then they would go to VOD. Do you think The Fog would be on 2,000 screens today?
Right.
No, I love The Fog. The Fog is a masterpiece, but that movie would go to the sort of smaller independent cinemas for a couple weeks, and then it would go to VOD. And it's just the nature of the business. And it sucks. And I'm not saying that makes it any more right or wrong than it is, but that's where it is.
I just feel like maybe, and this is not even a conversation worth having, but I feel like maybe these executives are overestimating the brand recognition of the Howling for the average moviegoer.
No, and I absolutely agree, because I think we've seen a few misfires in terms of remakes. I mean, not that they actually ever remade Point Break, but obviously if they had remade Point Break, there might have been some overestimation as to what that name meant to fans.
Right.
Because frankly, they could have called that movie anything.
Right.
They didn't have to call that movie Point Break. So thankfully it never happened.
They could have called it The Fast and the Furious.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, for somebody like Netflix, what they can do is, even if they don't release that movie theatrically and they just take it straight to Netflix, all they need to do is they're going to basically stream the original Howling for a couple months before they're going to release theirs, right? Because that makes sense, because that you're immediately going to get people to be like, oh, look at this old horror movie. And then you release the new one. It's very limited risk for them. I mean, they're rolling in money. So if they throw like $2 to $5 million in it, which is like an enormous amount of money comparatively to what Joe Dante had to work on his movie.
Yeah.
Like, it's very low risk, high reward for them.
Yeah.
And if it hits and it lands, then you know what? They can make sequels. And if it doesn't, they keep going and doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's why you're not going to see like Universal go and remake The Howling.
Right.
Or Paramount, or whoever. Like, they're gonna. There's definitely, like, unfortunately, risk assessment is like part of the movie industry these days. And it sucks.
Yay, art.
I know, yeah, it's like, yay, I love what we've turned into. It's like they turn into like insurance providers in a way. Where like they're like, well, we make your movie. Oh, I don't know. You're over 50, you smoke, and you're overweight, and you've got diabetes. I don't think we're gonna work with you. You know what I mean? So it just sucks. And what blows my mind is every time when I mention things like this online, like I always get like a lot of pushback from people where they're like, oh, that's not like that's not a thing. I'm like, do you like? I know what I'm talking about because I've been in these, like, I've had these conversations with people at various levels.
Right.
Like, I'm not a freaking expert, but I know enough about how this industry works. I know enough people who work at certain levels to be able to know what, it's a marketplace now. It's not just movies, and it sucks, but that's what it is. You can blame Marvel for that all you want, but it's been a long time coming.
Yeah. Well, we'll always have the Howling.
We'll always have Howling 81.
And the Howling leads directly to Twilight Zone the movie for Joe Dante. And Twilight Zone the movie leads directly to Gremlins for Joe Dante. So if you love Gremlins, you have the Howling to thank for that. If you love The Thing, you have the Howling to thank for that, because
Rob Bottin
gets the job on The Thing because of the Howling. So there's all kinds of reasons to love the Howling, even if you don't love the movie. And you're wrong if you don't love the movie.
Yeah, I never like to tell people they're wrong, but they're definitely wrong in this instance. And I'm sorry, you can direct all your hate to me over on Twitter at The Horror Chick. I'll take it, but you're wrong.
The Scream Factory Blu-ray of The Howling looks really, really good. It made me appreciate the photography in a way that I hadn't on previous watches. I was like, wow, this is actually a really beautifully shot movie.
Especially the night scenes, too.
Yeah.
And very much, especially in the beginning, as Karen's, like, in L.A., and then you have the cops, like, you intercut with this footage of the cops, like, you know, patrolling and stuff like that. Like, it's gorgeous. It's ominous, but it's gorgeous cinematography.
Yeah.
You didn't even mention, I'm going to totally butcher his name, Pino Donaggio?
Yeah.
Ah, yes. He was busy that year. Because he also did the score for, was it, I think he did Blowout,
did he do
too,
Dress?
didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes, he sure did.
Yeah. And I think that was also the year he did, because I just watched it with the Black Cat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the only reason I know this is because I just recently watched the Black Cat.
Yeah.
So.
Busy guy.
Yeah, he was. He was having quite a time. Yeah, I didn't realize how much he'd worked with De Palma.
Oh, all the time, yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
He was De Palma's composer of choice.
I dig it.
When he wasn't working with, like, Ennio Morricone on The Untouchables, he was working with Pino Donaggio.
Amazing.
Anything else you want to say about The Howling?
No, I think that's about it. Other than it's amazing. Yeah,
it's a good one.
I think that's about it. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for listening. As always, go to dailydead.com every day for horror news, reviews, and coverage. Follow Corpse Club on Twitter at Corpse Club, and find out when new episodes drop. And you can subscribe to Corpse Club wherever you get your podcasts. And go to corpseclub.com for more information on joining the Corpse Club. Thank you to our engineer, Brian, for his tireless work in editing the shows. And thank you, Heather, for being my horror BFF.
Thank you for being my horror BFF, Patrick.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next time, stay scary.